Surf's up. We're here with another episode of the Mauisnake Show. Today, I am platforming a guy that needs way more attention on YouTube. King T has joined me to talk not only about the latest news in the Tier 1 esports space for CS2, but this guy grinds more Tier 2 demos, Tier 3 demos than I think any person probably should, and he finds more diamonds in the rough more frequently than any other content creator out there. So welcome aboard, King T. It's a pleasure to have you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, always flattering to be told that. I'm still waiting on the day that I'm not underrated and finally join the elite overrated club, because they seem to have it way better off than the underrated content creators. But yeah, way too many Tier 2 demos. And yeah, it's just this. It's something I've really started enjoying doing when I was watching, all the crappy 9 a.m. games back when I had just an apprenticeship and no will to live. And so, yeah, love to talk about these kind of players. So, yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah, and I mean, it's also with the whole like underrated to overrated thing. I think that you already fit the bill, like being a British potential talent. So that's par for course. I think there are just so many British people that are in this space. Actually, I don't know why. I don't actually know why, but
well, in esports, what are the British good for except talking? Really,
that's true. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Let's be honest.
Well put. But yeah, if you guys want to check out King T's work, he has his own YouTube channel, which I will be linking in the description box below. So be sure to check out his Prospect series. That's more or less how I found him, and it's more or less why I am still in touch with this guy, just because he is putting out some severe, like he said, it's severely underrated. Like sometimes your videos get, no joke, under 3,000 views, and it's just like, wow, that's crazy. If people wanted to see good, like people always say they want to see like educational, thought-provoking demo grinder content that's well edited, well put together with a good script, you're doing that. So yeah, just giving you a huge shout out there. But what we're going to talk about first is going to be the news. And the second half of this episode, we're going to talk about some of those players that you've spotted, that I've spotted in the Tier 2 space, and are ones that are likely to make the jump to Tier 1. But first thing is first, the hot pressing news that everybody's talking about this very second is the fact that Niko has gone back on his Falcons agreement, or at least what we know was transpiring there, and he will be sticking with G2 with the very, very, very short and it's sweet "I stay" tweet. So what's your opinion, King T, on the fact that Niko is no longer joining Falcons?
If I'm Niko, if I'm a Niko fan, I think this is honestly the best move, because I saw this Falcons roster starting to be pieced together through all the rumors, and I thought maybe if you get Niko and m0NESY and you keep Boros and you find the right IGL, maybe you can just talent your way to something. But the moment that they started like falling apart a little bit, as m0NESY's definitely not coming, I don't know who the hell else there's going to be on this roster for talent. I'm starting to think this is going to be a disaster. No chemistry, no real time to build everything up, considering you're going from literally nothing, no core to work around. I didn't like the move at all for most of these players. So the fact that Niko's decided, and I think made the right decision to stay with G2 is good for him. Gives him the best possible chance to actually go and grab that first CS2 major, his first major in Go War CS2. That should be lovely for him. So I think it's good for him. You see Magus already committed. I think that was a foregone conclusion with the whole Zonic move. I think it's been hinted at for so long now. It just made sense that it's going to go and happen. But I'm not sure what the hell to make of the rest of the roster now. Potentially some other players coming through, but the big name talents, they haven't seemed to be able to secure them. And so I think they're kind of left out to dry here. There's not much else going on this roster that really excites me.
Right, because as it stands, they've dropped the 4 players that were with them before, and the only player remaining is Boros. And so Magisk would be joining. Seems like Snappi is in talks with them as well. We'll get to that too. Yeah. And if no Niko and m0NESY are joining this, you're missing out on so much firepower. And in a weird way, it almost feels like for this Falcons team, you might have jumped the gun a little bit on dropping all those players, because for my money, MHL wasn't a Tier 1 superstar opera, but he had the makings to probably start playing at that level. And if he was surrounded with some more veteran talent who would actually produce some firepower, because I will say that MBK, body, core, and Lonks, for example, they probably weren't the players you were looking to try to punch up into the top 10 with. But MHL, I think he's a ways away, but I wouldn't actually be dismissive of the idea that at one point, maybe in a year's time, MHL could be an opera on a team that is also in the top 15.
What's frustrating for me is I briefly actually talked about almost this exact set of moves when I made a random rambling video about Cadian's potential options. When I touched on Falcons, one of the main things I said is I'm keeping MHL alongside Boros. So I know the obvious drops. I made a little bit of a case for Lonix in terms of his talent, his potential like fit with certain players, but more importantly, I said MHL should stay. And here's the comparison I think most people will get. MHL was putting up better numbers than Torshi and Hades in Tier 2 for longer before he went off on a slight break, I think for education purposes or something like that. Then he came back, put up those numbers again, and then finally got picked up by Falcons. So he did it all in Polish teams and mixed teams, and he was an impressive talent. So the fact that they've gone and dropped him, I think, yeah, they really were locked in on that idea that they were getting a superstar, guaranteed. Because that's the one thing MHL's not. He's not guaranteed superstar at the next level. But if you look at the guys he's kind of outperformed at the same online level of play, there's definitely a reason to keep him, to try and work with him, especially if you're looking at a longer-term project. I think they really jumped the gun because they wanted that first major. They wanted to come out with a big bang, and that's kind of bitten them in the arse in this sense.
And one thing I'm also a bit peeved by with this is that we are both vouching for the potential that we see with MHL to be playing in Tier 1. And Truniq had that statement that was more or less that he wanted to give everybody a fair shot with this team and not just completely uproot what has been built already. And that doesn't really seem like it's coming to fruition whatsoever. In fact, those words seem rather hollow because they haven't even really played with Truniq as the coach, and he already he's just saying that nope, we're just gonna ditch these 4 guys. And so I was very upset and frustrated with some of the PR heavy wording that Truniq had in that big message that that interview that he gave with Luis Mira about why he dipped out from Vitality, why he joined Falcons. He said a couple lines like it wasn't about the money. He wanted to have control with the project, but he was going to give everybody a fair chance. And if already one of those key details he has gone back on and he hasn't give everybody a fair chance whatsoever, unless he just watched a couple scrims and said, you know what, I've seen enough. Like, if there's anybody though who has probably like good snap judgment like that, I would actually trust it is Truniq. But at the same time, to not even play a real official with these guys is just it's almost insulting for all these guys that were holding it down for Falcons in the meantime, as we knew that there was likely going to be some kind of crazy construction from them to try to poach all these superstars from different rosters.
Yeah, it's really weird. I kept waiting actually because every morning wake up, check the matches for the day, never seeing Falcons play, and the fact that all the moves then just happened really annoyed me. I think that's sure, you could have watched a couple scrims, and if you're the GM or the owner of the team, and Truniq's the guy you go out and sign to be your coach / I guess in some cases, really GM as well, you would give him the benefit of the doubt. You'd give him that freedom to go and make changes. But come on, to not even let them prove themselves in the slightest is a bit presumptive, I think is the best way to put it. Like, he just assumed there was nothing to be done here, and maybe it's an aggressive timeline that's been given to him. That's the one out I think I'll give him. Maybe he's been given such an aggressive timeline he refused to believe he could make it with this slot. It could be that.
Yeah, and with the fact that the RMR is in 3 months, you really want to put forward a roster as soon as possible to make sure that your org is actually making some money back on this giant investment in terms of the players that they're getting. Which brings me to another player that Falcons are targeting, mentioned him already, but Snappi has entered a verbal agreement supposedly with Falcons at this point. And I'll start with my opinion on this one, that this is just very disappointing because I'm glad that Niko is staying with G2 because it continues the legacy of G2. The continuity is there where we get to see all of the ups and downs with the roster. It's easier to become a fan for a lot of people if they just know that that sort of consistency is right there. And for Snappi to be leaving ENCE potentially, it just hurts because when you look at this ENCE roster, you see Nertz, Deha, Sunpais as the firepower trio for them. But I'm not really seeing anybody there that's completely jumping off the page outside of the structure and system that Snappi has put together with this team with Saw. And so for me, I do feel like this is going to really set back ENCE quite a bit, where sometimes you think of, like, for example, let's just say if G2 lost Hooksy and then they did a similar thing where they target another tier 1-ish IGL, I think people are going to be a little bit shocked, a little bit upset, but I don't think everybody's going to be up in arms about it, and people don't necessarily see Hooksy as the beating heart of G2, but Snappi is to me. He is the core of this team. He's been the one that's been building this for such a long time.
100%. When I think ENCE, I really think about Snappi. And honestly, long gone are the days where ENCE is that fun Finnish roster. No, this is Snappi's project where he's pulling disparate pieces together. He's using them to the best of his abilities. Players, a lot of the time, that came out of nowhere. If you're a tier 1 fan, you don't really watch tier 1 games, you'd have never heard a lot of these guys, but he's made them look like superstars so quickly. And I think it'd be a damn shame to see him go, but of all the players that I think I see linked with this project, his is the one where I think, yeah, go and do it, mate. As much as I'd hate the effect it has on ENCE, you're 32. You've not been making a King's Ransom on ENCE for the longest time. If he's deciding this was going to be his last year of competitive play anyway, go take that bag. Go do it. I support him 100% to go and do it. Because I'm a big fan of Snappi's game. I've loved the way he's led teams, the way he calls Nuke and always has called Nuke and run his teams on that map. Really was like some of the most inspirational stuff to me for getting into the deeper side of the game. So I'd love to see him just say, all right, this is the last year. I'm going to make a load of money and then call it. Maybe then go into coaching. Maybe then go back to ENCE and be the guy who forms the next great IGL potentially. But I can understand it from his perspective to just, break up the ENCE core, the heartthrob storyline, I guess. To me, it's always been one that a lot of people have been invested in emotionally. I think it makes sense to be. But I like this.
You raise an incredibly valid point there, where for someone like Niko to go back to G2, he was probably already being paid a huge sum of money. Mm-hmm. And the fact that Snappi, if I had to just throw out a number or guess, I would say he's probably making half of what Niko is making at best on ENCE. And if that's the case, and Falcons was probably going to give Snappi some kind of contract that would elevate him to one of the higher paid players in this space, which he is completely deserving of, by the way, and he should be paid, then that's also this ride into the sunset that you're proposing here, where from a financial standpoint and a realistic one for setting up the rest of your life and making sure that you have time once your playing career begins to fall off in terms of form, you're going to be able to at least have enough in savings that you can plan your whole next move and your transition to whatever it is next in life that you do with a little bit of a cushion. So that's I'm actually very glad that you brought that up. What do you think then about some of what do you think actually, like, this is kind of a random idea here, but like for the people that were signed before Snappi, Magisk, etc., do you think that the salaries that they had were above average, like below average? Like, do you think where do you think Boros is? Boros a budget signing for Falcons, you think?
Honestly, I think so. I don't think they had to commit that much money to especially outbid or outsign a team like the French core were playing under no org before. They didn't have a sponsor. They didn't have anything. So I don't think it actually cost them anywhere near as much as it would have been to try and secure these kinds of players. So maybe Boros is a bit of a premium above like the rest of them because he was making a huge name for himself. He was really impressive on a huge stage. So yeah, he probably got a bit of a bigger bag, but he's no way near like they had to. If I can just get that out straight, there's no way he had to be paid as much as you had to pay someone like Niko to even consider this kind of move. So I think he's relatively a budget option. There's no way he was making as much as he is on Falcons as he was on Monty.
No.
But it's still it shouldn't be that big of a toll on their payroll to have this player on.
What do you think of Boros as a player? You're someone that looks at tier 2 players a lot. Like,
I mean, my prospects video on him, it was hard to not just spew praise, because not only did I spend a lot of time watching his demos, and he's one of my favorite archetypes of players, highly aggressive, doesn't give a toss, gets in your face, wins every aim duel, and does it really cleanly a lot of the time. So I loved watching his demos, but then I also interviewed his IGL at the time, Mighty Max, when he was on Endpoint.
Right.
And Mighty Max basically came in and was like, yeah, you're right, he's broken, he's a cheat code. I just tell him to go places, or I set him up for any fight he wants to take, and then he kind of just does it. So for me, he's a no-miss prospect in terms of his ability. It's just a question of, well, he's been on a few rosters now. He's struggled to lock down spots at times. There's off-the-server rumors about maybe his attitude being a little diva-ish, or him struggling to adapt to being life away from home. So I'm thinking, if anything's going to hamper him, it's not going to be his individual ability. Like, he may not be a thinking man's Counter-Strike player, but at the end of the day, if he can outshoot you, he's going to beat you. And that's what he did on Monty, that's what he did on Endpoint, and I'm sure that's what he'll keep doing on Falcons, no matter the level.
Totally. That's that's kind of the beauty of the game, that it can be mechanics that win you a fight, or it could be outbraining your opponent, outpositioning them. But yeah, with Boros, I've not gonna throw around like hearsay or anything like that, but yeah, there have been some things about the way that he just, the attitude and like the effort being put into it. You would imagine though that when he was playing with the Falcons team before, Monty team before, he didn't have a coach behind him as strong as Zonic. And so if there's anybody that's going to try to maximize that potential, we would assume that it would be somebody like Zonic, and especially if it's going to be like someone like Snappi too, who's going to be able to harness his ability. That's when I actually am very much so excited with Boros. And I don't think that any of the stuff, say outside the server, or even just the way he plays the game, is going to be a detriment to them, because they would imagine him as just a tip of a spear also, that they're just going to try to use him solely for the purpose that he is basically built for, and that he's crafted his skill towards. But I want to shift the conversation away from Falcons at this point, as we are now possibly left with an ENCE that has no in-game leader, and they're eyeing Glaive as a replacement. This is a very weird move, because the position that Astralis found themselves in when Glaive was their leader was pretty bad. They were pretty shitty, actually, in fact, when he was the one that was calling for them towards the tail end of his tenure with them. What's your take on Glaive being the possible ENCE replacement, or Snappi replacement on ENCE?
I want to be optimistic and say this is going to be a sort of revitalization for Glaive, because it felt towards the end of the Astralis kind of project, I guess we can call it, the era, there was some problems. Like, COVID brought a lot of things to light for them that I think made Glaive realize he didn't have the motivation to keep pushing, to keep being on the greatest team. And his individual form took a big hit, really, and his calling wasn't quite on point. He didn't quite stay in tune with the meta, I think, might have been the big issue. So I'm interested to see if this is going to be a proper comeback. And I hope it is. I really hope it is, because there's nothing to really openly dislike about Glaive. And he gave us one of the great eras, played some of the most beautiful Counter-Strike we had seen for a long time. So yeah, hopefully he brings it back. What was there for like a good 18-month period wasn't good. Really wasn't good on Astralis. And so I'll always be fearful that that's what we're going to see. We're going to see a Glaive who can't frag, playing a style that maybe doesn't quite mesh with his players. And then also the awkwardness of him going from a career of Danish speaking, I believe, and I don't think I'm forgetting anyone, to having common English now and call in English. I think without the comfort of your longtime coach, there's a lot of things to adapt to. So I don't think this project will be immediately buttery smooth.
That's another great point, the fact that he's going to have to switch languages. I'm fairly confident he has never had to comm in English for an extended period. He was always great in interviews in English, and that actually that is a pretty strong indicator if somebody's going to be able to at least communicate competitively. I'm not able to bring off too many examples off the top of my head, but like people that would basically refuse our interviews when we're working on broadcast because they're like, oh, they're not comfortable with English. You could probably see that their comms are not great, and that things that are happening around them on the server aren't always as smooth either. Whereas Glaive has always just been fantastic. So I think that this is really interesting, and actually can, in some ways, like Glaive's legacy is so solidified in terms of his accomplishments in CSGO. It depends who you ask, but he's either 1A or 1B, him and Kerrigan being the GOAT IGLs of the game. And for Glaive, the main thing is, though, that he really only found that significant success with a single team, as in it was, sure, at one point it was Kirby to Magisk, but practically speaking, he's with 3 other guys, and what many also consider to be the GOAT coach in Zonic. And so that core not being with him, to me, is going to be a really cool test because, one, it's a new game, but I think that in terms of these early results we're seeing in CS2, it's not like this CSGO to CS2 transition is so drastic that it's suddenly like teams are falling off by like 30% or increasing themselves in terms of stature by 30% either. It's more or less there's just these like slight shifts. Maybe it's like motivation or just very slight adaptations to the meta that have boosted or dropped teams a bit. So for Glaive, he could still take a lot of the lessons of what made him and Astralis so good to this team, but I do fear that the lack of adjusting to the ever-changing meta, as he was showing he was incapable of doing in his latter stages on Astralis, is possibly going to be rearing its ugly head. I don't know if he's one that's always going to be grinding everything out in terms of the demos. And the sad thing is, really, it's just that for some players, if you've achieved everything that there is to achieve, it's very hard to get yourself completely motivated again to just roll it all back and find that motivation again. Given that it's a new game, I think we're seeing that some people are extending the shelf life of their careers, actually. Like people, like Rain was kind of on a big decline for me. And then pretty much after they completed the Grand Slam, it was just like, wow, he just really fell off right there. But then he kind of came back for CS2. For Sydney, he looked really solid. And I guess that can come into play for Glaive. And one thing that's kind of nice to see is that ENCE were a really solid team with Snappi. They were obviously top 5 in the world for a very long stretch of time, and they had only won a single championship in Dallas. And I'm not trying to get myself too hyped for this whole thing, but in a way, it's a similar sort of ceiling that ENCE had hit. And then you see what I'm getting at, where it was like with Kerrigan. Right. With Kerrigan, with Astralis, they sort of hit this ceiling where they were very good. Everybody knew that they had the potential to possibly win these tournaments, but they were just coming up short every single time. And perhaps Glaive has that little key piece of, like, that last missing piece to this formula that can actually make ENCE into a championship contender team all of a sudden. That's me being very positive and optimistic about this. I don't think that's going to happen, but I think there's potential for it, and I wouldn't mind seeing it because then Glaive can once again come back and he can be the king of in-game leaders once again.
Yeah, and if he does it on a different game with a completely different core, then the conversation's back on. Because for me, it ended the moment Karen got that major, because that was the only thing really looming over his head. To have taken so many teams to the top, really, for me as an IGL, was the more impressive ability than that one big streak. But if Glaive all of a sudden, he has the same story with a different roster, taking over from a different Danish IGL and going, hey, you're just not quite that guy. I am. That would be pretty baller. It'd be a great storyline, but it's really wishful thinking after what we've seen.
I mean, if he can make it happen twice, it's not a fluke. It's not that the core was... I think because at some points with that Astralis lineup, as they were falling apart and they were just getting worse and worse, it almost kind of like the slander started coming out for Glaive that was like, he only did it with the same core. Was it just Device that was carrying him? Was Zonic really the mastermind behind the whole operation or what? And so this would be a great opportunity for him to once again just... enter the ring and keep the conversation going, even though he had that break. But let's shift to the stuff that you're a specialist at. Okay, this is going to be all now from here on out. We're done with the news. We're going to talk about up and comers in the space, but we have a couple crowd pleasers. Let's just say that. Like, I'm gonna stick with a couple people that I've seen because they kind of have played against tier 1 competition here and there, and you have some real like hipster ass picks. So
of course,
first one, we got to talk about him. He's on the tip of everybody's tongue when it comes to tier 2 talent that need a real shot at tier 1. It's Donk. Okay, like we couldn't talk about up and comers without talking about this guy. Playing for Spirit right now, he has stolen the show so consistently for them when they've played. I think that what's exciting about him is that when we watch sometimes just high-rated rifle players coming up in the tier 2 space, sometimes they do a lot of stuff by themselves, that they're kind of a solo player, like in a lurking position, or they don't really have to rely on their teammates that much, and you don't really know if they're gonna necessarily have all the timings that they should if they were to enter a tier 1 team. But Donk is leading the charge on Spirit. He is very frequently first in on every single fight, and that's where his mechanics show off the most. And in fact, when it comes to CS2, he's maintained that level of mechanical prowess. And so I wanted to do a pro comparison for a lot of the people that we're talking about, and this is so ridiculous to even say in my eyes, but I feel like I have to do it. My pro comparison for Donk is just Niko. Aggressive space taker that is so willing to be the entry point for his team, and he's somehow brute forcing mechanics through all of these other even tier 1 teams, sometimes tier 2 teams, and showing that he is such a cut above the rest of the people that he's playing against.
Yeah, the greatest compliment I can play to Donk was that when I made a video about him, I couldn't really compare him to anyone initially. I was just stuck because who the hell plays the way he does? No one really. Eventually, I went back and looked at some Niko demos, and I was like, that's the guy. That's the guy, because the way their crosshair moves is somehow ahead of time. Like he's seeing the future pretty much. There's no massive flick the majority of the time. It's just he goes out. There's 3 heads on screen. The crosshairs on it each time, and there's very few times I watch a demo and I think, is he cheating? Is he just maybe cheating? It's happened to me twice. So far, we're all right. He's not been caught. Joel, we'll see about that. But
yeah,
Donk looks absolutely absurd. And he's doing, as you say, he's taking the point of the pack. He's not extremities like lurking around doing his own thing. He's not just being kind of launched like a missile into mid the way Boros is. He's very much with the pack, working the space slowly. Then they execute, and he paths correctly. He's got all the timings down, and then he blows everyone's head off anyway. So at this level where he's playing in tier 2, he is a cheat code. You'll see that in his stats. I think since transitioning from the academy to the main team, his numbers have gotten better against technically high-level competition, but that's just because the system's being executed even better, and he is a part of the system and yet exceeds above it in the way he executes. So I think Donk is going to be special. If he can hold up to the pressure, obviously there's always the last remaining question mark when you're talking about a 16-year-old. If he can hold up under the pressure, the bright lights, all that nonsense, Spirit have got another 7-8 figure buyout waiting for them. If they can't keep him, obviously, because he's absolutely insane.
Yeah, I would say if I have to bring up a weakness with Donk, it's, well, I guess 2 things. One is by sheer virtue of the role, if the strategies aren't well executed or people are aware of how he's going to be pathing, or just the way that Spirit like to take space, Donk can sometimes come off a little bit, I don't even know if I want to say one tricky, because it's more just the strat itself is something that sometimes teams seem to be aware of, and then they can just throw good counter utility, or they can pre-aim him really well, or just put an op on whatever position he's going to be entering in. So the other thing is that kind of when he's in an open fight space, I do find that sometimes and this is something where you really have to do a lot of risk calculation, but to me, Donk will sometimes create losing conditions in rounds too, where they're ahead, but he just wants to brawl a little bit more than maybe some other players would in the tier 1 space. And sometimes that'll give up an unnecessary death. And then there can be a cascading effect where it's like, okay, well, he was the linchpin in that position. And so that was probably just a fight where if he relaxed for maybe a few more seconds, let someone else get first contact, or just let the round play out a little bit more, he wouldn't just give up these infrequent deaths. But the thing is that I also see him go for those fights all the time too, and then he wins them. So it's a trade-off. You would love to see that he never makes any mistakes, but that's just so unrealistic. So I'm gonna take the bad with the good on this guy.
100%. And the first negative you mentioned there is the one that I kind of felt too was true, is that's the only thing he's got left to take him to the Niko level, is that he doesn't ever create the round himself. There's never a moment where he is just the be all and end all of their strategy. Just let him work this space and he'll get the openings. He's always accompanied, he's always set up. And that's why, as you mentioned, it can maybe look a little predictable sometimes, or he gets caught by the other team red-handed because they know what he's doing. And that's something that's going to come with time, because honestly, he's that young, he's that inexperienced, despite looking so smooth and so comfortable. But there are sometimes where he could, I guess, I'm asking a lot here from a 1.3 rated rifler. He could, I guess, do more to win games, but it feels like we're nitpicking really a player of that quality.
Oh, totally, totally.
Yeah.
This is also one of those picks for players that are coming up where so many people are excited about it because also it's so much more frequent to see an opper once they jump from tier 2 to tier 1 get exposed because they were just using the zoom banger one shot one kill gun, and sure they had some really good mechanics, but once they're up against opposition that's going to use better utility against them, or just have other oppers that can anti-strat them a little bit more, they'll be punished more, or even just facing off against good riflers that are better at holding angles. Because I think like tier 2 operas that make a lot of mistakes sometimes just re-peak too much because they just kind of abuse the mechanics of the gun. But if you're a rifler putting up these kinds of numbers too, you're actually so frequently winning aim v aim duels against other people who are grinding 100 hours every 2 weeks. So it's really easy to get excited about this guy. And I don't like, okay, what do you think? Like, actually, the question with Donk is like, I guess there's like just this shred of doubt where people are thinking, oh, if he jumps up to tier 1, is there any way he can be exposed more? Or do you think it's just going to be a very slight drop off once he gets to tier 1?
I have a hard time imagining him being exposed. I feel like I'm watching the rifle equivalent of Zywoo. In terms of, as a prospect playing in the low levels, seemingly just waltzing through everything, I can't really think of anything that's going to really throw him off. I did bring up, the pressure, maybe. I have to clutch at that. Like, he's just so mechanically pure that I can't really doubt him, to be honest. I'd put a good wager on it that in the next 2-3 years, he'll be on the HLTV top 20 if it takes him that long.
Yeah, I feel like it could just be 1 year. I feel like it's just going to be next year.
It depends if Spirit can get through the qualifications and play enough big events. It is pay to win in Counter-Strike. It's not all the iron price. So if they can get to the right events at the right times, because there's a lot about timing from like rank 15 to 35 in the world, in EU especially, it's not about being the best team. It's about having the right timing, getting the right events, assuming you didn't pay your way in. So we'll see how it works out for Spirit. But I think, Donk he's a can't miss.
Okay. All right. Now you have a mega hipster pick. I have not heard of this player before. I have not seen them play. So I'm just going to ask you the questions here. So
go nuts.
Who is Tomiko, if that's even how you pronounce it?
So Tomiko, as I've been reading it, he's a Polish rifler on a team called Permitter, who, if you've watched their games, hello, fellow 2,000 people who watch those streams. Nice to see you on these videos. But he's a brawler. This entire team, okay, to put it in context, this entire team just brawls. You'll see some of this in Tier 2 every now and then, where a team is a bunch of young players and they will just swing everything constantly. And he's the guy who really makes it work. He's the one who swings first. He's the one who swings the best. And he's got really clean mechanics. Makes, relative to the style of play his team plays, good decisions. He still at times looks stupid because they will have 4 men swing mid on almost any map on CT side and lose a round because that's how they play. But overall, Tomiko is crazy skilled. And I think, there's a lot to wait for, a lot to work on. I want to see him paired up with some veteran IGLs, veteran coaches to mold him into more of a end result. But for now, the talent is definitely there. And I'm just really excited to see where he progresses from it, 'cause he's still very young. I think it's a bit weird, because we're going to talk about a lot of players being young. They'll all be older than Donk. But he's definitely still got a lot to show and a lot to figure out about himself and his own play.
Yeah, I'll just bring up some of the numbers here because that's my contribution to this conversation with this guy. So last 6 months I'm looking at, he's actually had 66 maps against top 50 opponents, and he's had a 1.12 rating, and he's only 19 years old on top of that. So if also what you're saying, where it's like the system that he's in is just all over the place and kind of random.
It's death-centric is how I'd describe it. His DPR is going to be inflated by the team he plays on.
That's what I was going to bring up. His DPR is a little bit high, but it's at 0.72, and his KPR is 0.77. But if you're just playing in a system that just locks things down a little bit more, there's a little bit more structure or semblance of a flow in a round, then you're going to imagine that those deaths would probably go down because you probably just have better utility or better ways to set yourselves up, and
100%.
Then all of those mechanics that you're already talking about are just going to flourish even more because the windows your opponents have are going to definitely shrink in terms of when they can find kills on you.
100%. Yeah, it get a bit frustrating, honestly. I think I was watching a Mirage game, and I saw the same sort of things like attempted on their CT side that didn't really work, but just thrust him into the midst of a big fight. And yeah, that got a bit frustrating to watch. So hopefully a team is going to come looking for this sort of talent. Perhaps someone like Nine decides they're going to need a younger rifler in the next year or so, and they'll go looking through teams like this, like Permitter, because there's a lot of like young Polish teams with some talent to talk about, and that might be his opportunity to take the next step up.
I'm seeing that he was also on that Los Kogutos roster. Was he on the team that did they like take Astralis out in a qualifier one time or something also?
They did. That is that roster, I think, that's been signed by the org Permitter.
Oh, okay. Okay, so this guy has beaten Astralis online? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, who hasn't, though?
Yeah, why not?
Let's be real.
Sure. Okay. Well, that's a big feather in his cap. Okay. Do you have anything more on him, or I'll move on to my next?
Well, I know you wanted to play a comp for this kind of
Sure. So
conversation.
Who would be a
I
good
thought
one?
it's a bit difficult because oftentimes when I see a guy who fights a lot, frags a lot, dies a fair bit, I tend to lean towards Jacob, especially when I see the sort of CT plays he's going for. But I think the way his mechanics looked, like aesthetically, gave me a Rain vibe. Obviously, that's high praise.
Yeah.
And he's got a long way to go to making, because Rain makes great decisions when he's on point. He's always looking in the right places and is quite sharp. But that's kind of the spectrum, like the side of the spectrum I'm looking at. I'm looking at Jacob, he's a big brawler, and I'm looking at, especially on his pistols, some really clean taps. So I was thinking those are the two guys I was being drawn towards when I was watching his demos.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna move into another player that looks to be making the jump from tier 2 to tier 1 momentarily. It seems like there are conversations of skullz joining Liquid, so I just wanted to talk about him because I know even though people are hearing the name a lot, I'm not sure if people have really watched too many Pain games. And so bringing up skullz here briefly, the thing is that what was nice is that the reason I also really wanted to talk to Scoopster in the last Mauisnake Show is that he actually made an article about looking at Liquid's new roster by the stats, and I had that that was in the description of the last one. But skullz kind of is one of the more passive riflers that is showing to be a consistent force in the Brazilian CS space. There is some role overlap with him and Naf, and I don't really think it's actually going to be too much of a problem with Liquid moving forward because Naf has shown that he can be such a versatile player. But for skullz himself, and why he has in many ways stolen the show and been a suitable Queserado replacement since that deal fell through for Liquid, it's just that he plays a lot of the site anchor positions. Like on CT side, he's playing the same spot as Queserado. He's playing Anubis A anchor. On Mirage, he's doing A anchor roles. He's like the monster anchor on Overpass. And then when you look at what he's doing for T sides, he's doing a lot of lurking on the extremities. So this guy, for kind of the sake of Liquid, makes sense role-wise. And I would say if you like the Rainwaker experiment that Liquid went for didn't quite work out. Rainwaker just didn't quite have the punching power. And also, I felt like he didn't always recognize when he's creating losing conditions in rounds for Liquid, and sometimes he'd get caught for doing that. skullz is a much more safe pair of hands when I've watched him on Pain. He sometimes doesn't have the best role or angle management is what I call it. Like sometimes I do see him on lurks where he's exposed to a couple of angles at the same time. But the thing is that he has very snappy aim. Like I have seen him have great corrections in rounds where he's literally looking at the wrong angle. He is peeked by another professional player, and yet he can still flick to their head fast enough that he can correct. I personally wish that he just managed his angles a little bit better so he would never be exposed to two things at once, which some of those best lurkers in the world can really do so much more consistently. Like, I'll just give an example. Rops, for example, it feels like this guy never gets peeked from an angle he doesn't want to get peeked from. But I almost, in a weird way, actually would say skullz' raw aim, just putting mouse onto new position on the screen, could even be faster than a lot of Tier 1 pros at present. So what have you gathered from what you have seen, King T, of skullz?
I I have the same reservations I kind of had initially when they announced the Rainwaker move.
Hmm.
Those are things you briefly touched on about the NAF rolls. I I didn't see much adaptation made or effort put in to get Rainwaker some of his own, his ideal spots. I didn't see that many concessions out of NAF, and I don't really expect to see that much more. Even though they talk a good game, you had one shot, you didn't. I'm not going to assume you're going to do it this time. I did like what I saw from the skullz demos, the few that worked. Thank you, CS2.
Oh yeah, that's another thing. When I was trying to look up this
So
stuff, I
frustrating.
just couldn't even watch some of the games because of the game just keeps updating or whatever. Yes.
Yeah, that's quite annoying. So I had to watch, and because he hasn't played since like mid-October, I had to watch a couple like stream VODs when I initially started fighting. I managed to get a couple working in the end using some crazy bits of like freeware I found online. Yeah, he makes solid decisions for the most part. That's what I kind of liked. But I found in tier 2 Brazilian play, he was getting caught out by teams who knew his tendencies.
Yeah.
And I was like, really? Come on, dude. How predictable can you be? Like, that's a bit of an issue for me. I think overall, you're right. Mechanically, he's far more explosive than Rainwaker ever was. Rainwaker's biggest strength was being the smartest man in tier 2, pretty much, for EU. Like, he always found the right angle, the right timing, and he didn't need to smash a bunch of heads off. He just always had the better fight. But no, I like skullz in a lot of ways. I have the same reservations I did when they made that Rainwaker signing. If NAF's not going to make concessions, can he then still find his comfort speaking English for the first time, making the right calls, having the right understanding of what's going on around the map? It's always tough as a lurker, I think.
Yeah, and I wanted to do a pro comparison, but what's weird is that, like you're saying, he gets caught out, and sometimes his positioning to me just seems kind of just noobish. Like the fact that he does expose himself to multiple angles. I couldn't actually come up with a really good pro comparison because I just feel like all the tier 1 lurkers I watch isolate angles so much better than skullz does. So I almost just felt like he was a floatier version of NAF. Like he just it's almost like a floppy that just doesn't take as much care of all of his angles.
Yeah, they're lackadaisical.
Yeah, and that's in a way skullz has been so solid for Pain in a lot of their games that I don't want to just put so much doubt forward for him, but it is a pretty significant drop off for Liquid that they were targeting someone like Serato and to not get them and to get skullz.
Yeah.
I just the more I watch of skullz, actually, the more unsure I am. Is this going to get them to being a championship contender, or is skullz going to be a liability when he's actually facing tier 1 opposition regularly?
It's a big question. It's very important to think about that, because when I was looking for a comparison to him, I was also just going, I put Serato, then I put in brackets, generous.
Yeah.
That's the best way to put it. Because CT side, when he's locking things down and making those big multi-kills happen, you want to say, yeah, I can see it. But then at the rest of the game, you're kind of like, nah, he's not anywhere near that level of polish. And in some ways, his gameplay just doesn't look right. It doesn't feel right for that sort of a generous comparison. So we'll see what comes of it if it does. Officially, it's not happened yet.
Right.
It's one of those things where we all know it's going to happen at this rate. If it's been reported like this, it probably will. And hopefully it works out for him. Hopefully he does show that he is Serato 2.0. But yeah, as you said, the more you watch, the more you're like, this may not mesh perfectly.
It's just not that airtight game that I'm used to when I watch tier 1 lurkers. Like, Rops is such a quintessential example of someone
Rops
who
ruins so many other demos, though, doesn't he? Like, you watch a Rops demo, you're like, everything's as close to perfect as it can be, really. It's like kind of annoying.
It's like 95% good decision making. With skullz, it's almost like on T side, I sometimes am like 70% good decision making. It really drops off, and I feel like he's been somehow not getting punished as hard as he should be, just because his mechanics can be so strong against some of the people that he's played against lately.
Yeah, his mechanics are great, and honestly, Brazilian demos can be all over the place.
Yeah.
In terms of the level of play, in terms of the way the game's like thought about, it's an absolute nightmare. I think I was prepping during one of the WePlay seasons. I was taking a look at one of the Brazilian academies because I saw they'd won some games in Brazil, and I was like, oh, with a tier 2 frame of reference, I'm like, yo, that's impressive because EU tier 2 is really competitive. I watched the games. It was an absolute just mess. I'm talking teams were taking bomb sites and then their 2 entries were just running through to CT just to go look for fights.
Yeah.
wildly. And I was like,
Yeah, for
you
real.
can't be doing this. They
There's
then came to WePlay and did the same thing and got smashed for it. I was like, this is real. These are winning games comfortably against tier 2 pros in Brazil. And I was like, okay, you're going to take every Brazilian number you see with a pinch of salt because they might have been playing basically deathmatch for all you know.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's one thing where, yeah, like the Brazilian space has actually done a good job in terms of just lately producing enough good tier 1 teams that have been competitive in doses. Like we see Pain sometimes look good. Obviously, Furia, even Imperial have had moments where they've punched up. But then you kind of actually look at really how those games are going in tier 2 Brazil, and it's just not the prettiest Counter-Strike, all things considered.
Really not, no.
Yeah. What would you say actually? Okay, this is just completely random question. In terms of the other regions, so Americas, South America, Asia, for kind of, and I guess you could even just say America tier 1 because, or Asia tier 1 or whatever the highest level in Asia is, because it's essentially tier 2 if you drop them in Europe.
Yeah, it caps at basically tier 2, doesn't it?
Where do you think of those regions, like they stack up against each other?
I think Asia plays the most coherent CS.
Hmm.
It may not be the EU meta sometimes, and at times it's can be a bit flamboyant in the way they play because they do like to take fights, but there's way more of a clear plan and an idea of what we're doing and why we're doing it than there is in South America. There is in the majority of the NA games I watched because, man, I was researching, like, you know, you initially gave me a different name for one of your players.
Yeah, yeah.
I've managed to watch some of his demos. What on earth?
I know.
NA players
I had to
doing?
move away from that guy, actually.
Like, he's not untalented.
Yeah.
And neither was, like, he has a teammate as well that I actually thought kind of looked decent and made some really big plays. But I was watching what they were doing and what the other team was doing. I was like, this is nothing. This is not. This is nothing.
Right.
What are we doing?
This ain't right.
Just go away. Just try again.
Yeah, yeah. That's why I was just like, you know what, screw it. I'm just putting Donk as my first one because if I really try to sell people on certain tier 2 North American players, I'm just going to hurt myself and my reputation, actually.
Yeah, it's like Tomiko had a high death rate because his team did like coordinated brawls a lot of the time. NA players just like, oh, I was here and I got a kill. Guess I'm now living here, aren't I? The middle of mid.
Yeah.
Anyone else want some? And then they die like Muppets. I was just so annoyed. It was so frustrating, man.
Yeah, yeah. It's a different world. It's a different world over there.
Yeah.
Okay. That's okay. Let's go to your next one. Let's go to your next one. This guy uses the name of what essentially watching America's CS instills in me. His name is Depression. So
yeah.
What are your thoughts on this guy? And actually,
the happiest man in all the Balkans. Depression. He's a bit of an odd one because when he got announced as a part of this AGO rebuild, I was kind of excited because I was like, hey, finally we're going to get to see him on a team for a consistent amount of time. Mm-hmm. He was constantly shifting rosters, changing all over the place. He was even briefly on, I believe it was the Fnatic Academy in like one of the final seasons of WePlay or maybe one random middle season. It was a bit odd. And for me, Depression's a really interesting character because when you watch him play, he's clearly a full hybrid talent. He can play with anything. It's just that he is also the AWPer. So I went through these games seeing him as like a really interestingly impactful pack player who can trade really well, find good shots, but then I'm just waiting for him to whip the bloody AWP out and go ham. And then when he does, he has great highlight rounds. Quite controversially, well, uncontroversially really at this point, a tier 2 AWPer with talent missed the easy shots, hit the hard ones. That happened a fair bit. But I like the way like he plays some anchoring spots with rifles just as good as most up and coming anchors are able to. He looked really solid no matter what the situation was. So that's really what's been keeping me intrigued with him, is seeing what comes next. And then when CS2 gets announced and we see this sort of distancing from the AWP, I don't think the AWP is actually worse. I just think no one's comfortable with it yet because of the way flicking has changed. If we're going to see a hybrid meta, Depression is going to thrive because no matter what economy the team is on, he's going to be impactful. So I've really liked watching Depression, which is such a weird thing to have to say out loud. AGO might be the team for him to really like develop and show his next step because most of the tier 2 players I'm talking about, they spend at least 6 to 12 months on one roster, finding comfort, winning games, usually having decent sort of runs in these online cups. Depression's not really had the opportunity to do that with anyone. Even though he's been pretty well-known name for coming on 2 years, I think maybe. It's been a long time since he's been around. It's just he's never had any consistency. So AGO is going to be a big opportunity for him. Hopefully we see more development. His numbers are good. The talent's there. Hopefully the attitude that his team jumping indicates isn't real.
Okay. So who would be like a pro comparison for this guy? I have a name in mind based off of what you told me, but I'm not really sure.
I struggled with this.
Yeah.
I really did, because there were times when he was on his AWP, he looked to me like the Ents version of Sumpires.
Okay.
As the most, of course, we're going generous with the comparisons.
Yeah.
I can't be asked to find the exact.
Sure. No, it's always just like, yeah, if they scaled their game up, they would be maybe that.
But yeah, he's bold and confident with his AWP. Like, sure, he goes for confidence peaks, but never too ridiculous. Never, he's not Junior. So I really liked what I saw. That's the generous comparison. I'm curious to see who you think he actually matches up with based on that description, though.
On the description, I mean, he sounded like a more op-centric Stown from what you were saying, but
okay,
that's from what you were saying. You've seen him infinitely more than I have, so
I think Stown is far too because he's not really. I think Stown gets far more opportunities to work things in as the individual, as a bit of an extremity. Never a hard lurk, obviously.
Right.
That's never been his role, but he gets far more solo responsibility, which, as DEPRESHN as the AWPer who's coming off the AWP onto a rifle, doesn't really ever get to do. There's clear set roles for that on the team. But no, I get what you mean. In terms of the versatility, just general ability, that does make some sense to me.
Okay. All right. Let's move to... I wanted to do a shout out to some NA talent because I do want to instill people with some hope that there is something good happening here. And so I've heard this guy's name pronounced two different ways, but I'm going to go with just spelling out every letter, JBA. The other name, I've heard it as Jaba. Have you heard that?
That's what I call him, yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't think there's really a wrong answer because I've actually listened to enough tier 2 games and casters where they have said both. Yeah. But I have heard casters saying both in the tier 2 space, and I imagine they would know better than I would, and I've heard both things. So just for the sake of consistency between us, I'll say Jaba. So Jaba has been playing on Forsaken with Infinite, Stanislaw, Wiz, and CXEI. And to me, he's been kind of a pretty solid rifle pack player. I feel like if I had to go off of the rip here and pick a player that a pro comparison reminded me of, very, very briefly, I actually thought Flit. I don't know what you think of that comparison, where it's a bit of a ways, again, it's if you really scaled up all of his abilities, I think he could potentially be somebody that's just left on his own a little bit more, but he was a little bit more pack player than Flit was. So I wouldn't, but it was kind of the way that, it was almost like when I saw the way that Jaba would clear things, just kind of the movements for what Flit would do. Just for some reason, I just had a flashback of when Flit was especially on Forza, and I watched his demos a lot more then, that he would just something about his preparation for fights was very clean, and Jaba does that very, very well on top of that.
I love that. When you said Flit, I was a bit confused, but then that specific mechanical detail is exactly correct. Yeah, that's in that sense, it's a perfect analysis, in terms of the comparison 1-to-1.
Yeah,
because his angle management and the way he repositions and looks for the fights and does it so cleanly and so smartly. Yeah, you're on point with that.
Cool. I mean, you were also going to bring this guy up too potentially if I didn't. So what have you thought about the Jaba?
Yeah, well, he's on my list. He's a bit of an odd one because my comparison, it gets pretty specific. It's early days Fnatic Mezzi, because he's a pack player, but he's also the definite closer of the team. He's a pack player who will not take the first fight at any moment. I mean, sure, on a team with, I think, Sexy, is it pronounced? Sixy? CXZI, whatever.
People have said so many things for this guy's name that casters have literally started calling him Danny in Tier 2 North America. It's so ridiculous. Yeah, I say Sixy. I say Sixy myself.
Sexy? Sexy's generous for him.
I'm saying Sixy, and I'm consciously trying not to say sexy, okay?
I've forever just called him Sexy. I didn't realize there was that much of a hoopla about how you pronounce that mess of letters.
Yeah.
But on a team with that guy, you're never going to get many opening opportunities because he takes every opportunity he can to really have a duel. But yeah, Jaber, he comes at like, he's got a 2% clutch rate on this Forsaken lineup. That's actually absurd. If there's any other stat nerds out there, you'll know. Like, that's actually really high. It's not something people maintain for any extended period of time, and he has basically with this roster the entire way through. So I've been really impressed with that. It actually shone through in the demos I watched as well, that there's a lot of clutch situations, and he plays them really well. And that repositioning aspect is exactly what allows him to do it. He manages his angles really well. He's never exposed to two, unlike a certain person we watched earlier.
Yep.
And yeah, he hits his shots. He's really good on pistols, which was something that I made special note of. I really liked his pistol play. And so I'm really excited about Jaber because honestly, I'm one of the first people to get, I wouldn't say mad at NA Counter-Strike, but I'm never optimistic about it. And well, with Floppy looking better over the last few months, and with me finding Jaber as sort of a potential like up-and-comer, a guy who should be looking to get promoted, yeah, there's something to actually sing about, shout about in the NA scene right now. There's a few decent riflers coming up. There's some players who need a lot of polish further down in the ranks, but there's actual talent. So it's not all doom and gloom. Just need some players to pull their finger out. You know, maybe someone take some coaching roles, come back from Valorant or something, and have a word with these younger players because there's some talent lying about, and Jaber is the most polished of the lot. Of the young guys, I think there's no one more polished right now in NA.
Yeah, and I think is he 19? He's pretty young.
He's 18, 19. He's a young guy, and considering his age and his relative inexperience with like any real structured teams, he plays really well. I think Stanislaw deserves credit just on that basis as well, though.
Yeah,
because there's no way it's all self-taught. I'm sure Stanislaw's had a big impact, and I think credit to him for actually grinding away in the lower levels.
Okay. Yeah, there were obviously other people I really wanted to hone in on for Tier 2 North America, but it was difficult to pull the trigger on it. But
it's ugly.
Jaber is one where it does seem like if he continues trending in the fashion that he has lately, that there's something to be hopeful for. And that's all we can do in North America, okay? All we can do is hope, it feels like. We haven't really gotten anything in terms of results for some time, and so we're just always thinking about promise and potential, and Jaber's got that. You have one more for us here that another just no one's ever heard of this guy other than you and the thousands of, the couple thousand that are watching those streams, and the thing is like, half of those people are usually just angry in Twitch chat at the bets they made all the time. But
they are, mostly gambling addicts. Like,
yes.
You know,
yeah.
Let's be honest. I rarely see the chat talk about anything other than over/under on individual player frags. And when it's the under, of course, he's trying to lose that person money. It's always the case. I find it very entertaining. But no, this player I picked out, plays on, it's a Russian team. There's, I think, 3 Russians or 4 Russians, something like that on this team. That's Team Space, and that's the player Truniq, who is, of the 3 players I picked, for me, the most exciting. Because he does things in a really well-processed, logical way. Now, he's primarily on T side, sort of, how I explain this to a friend. I was talking to a friend about this the other day. He's sort of like, you have a spear point that you jab into the area to take control of. You pull it out, and he's the barb you leave behind. And he'll just linger, and he'll make plays out of little pockets of space that you leave him in. And he's really impactful. I mean, usually when you watch Tier 2 players who are lurk heavy, they're there because they make the right reads. They can even do some second calling. Usually that's why the agile wants him to be the guy left somewhere to hear the info, relay the right stuff. But this guy's also hella explosive. Like, he can just pop the hell off. Like, you'll see a smoke fade, and because you're not watching the demo because it's a live stream, thank you, CS2, you just see 2 headshots appear in the feed. And he's just ripped 2 heads off after a smoke faded. And this is CS2 smoke fade. This isn't a CSGO one-way.
Right.
Like, he is just that much better than some players. And I've been really excited watching him. I think I gave the most generous player comp of the day when I started looking at him thinking, there's a bit of ROPS in there. There's a bit of ROPS in there. And that's what excites me. When I see that sort of polish, like the thought-out approach, the way he took his fights, I was like, yeah, there's a little bit of ROPS in there. And that's really what has me the most excited about this guy, is that he's not only explosive, he is genuinely a smart player. So Truniq, huge potential. The progression for a player like him through the CIS scene is going to be interesting with the way it's been split, thanks to, the incident that's still ongoing, and potentially a lack of availability on certain teams. Hopefully for him, he can find a spot on somewhere like a Forza, should they ever rebuild again. Because I don't think this team space roster without a few more changes makes the next step up. Mm-hmm. But he's definitely very talented, very smart, and a definite one to keep your eye on.
Cool. All right, those are the people we brought to the table today. I'm kind of just cycling through at the end if any news popped up while we were talking. There is one thing that I usually do actually now for these podcasts, where it's Monday, which means the new HLTV ratings actually just came out. So if you bring these up really quickly, there's been a couple shifts here and there.
Well, the rankings.
Yeah, the rankings. And so in terms of what I like to do is create like a pretty realistic power rankings if these teams were to enter like the top 8-ish teams or 10 teams were to be seeded. Do you think that there's anything that sticks out to you? So I'll read it for the audience if they're just listening. That 1 through 10 right now is FaZe, Maus, G2, ENCE, Vitality, Complexity, Navi, Monty, VP, Cloud9. How would you change that ranking? I know you wouldn't really seed a tournament with 10 teams, but just in that case.
Honestly, I think we're in a stage right now where this is prime VP go and win an event territory.
Okay, that's exactly where I would have changed it as well. VP being 9th right now seems too low based on the fact that the teams that are above them being like Complexity, Navi, Monty. I think Complexity actually in some ways is a little bit fitting, but I'd probably put VP over Navi as it stands.
Complexity on form have played some good CS. It's the best we've seen out of the Liege in a long time. But right now, it's just the vibe. It's just Virtus Pro beats everyone from 6 down.
Yeah.
And then they have a chance in every series against the top 5 because they are the Jame-led weirdos, really, with all that talent. So, VP for me is the one that seems too low. It's funny to still see Monty competing after everything.
Yeah.
Because they've had to change and adapt and find new ways to win. And they've kept on doing it. So huge credit. So especially I think the Ukrainian core of that team who are responsible for the majority of implementing that, like Demka keeping consistent, Waro finding more impact. They've done an immense job to maintain this kind of seeding. So congrats to them because they deserve it.
Okay, I'm going to give you a tougher question right now. If you have to pick on Monty right now, who's their best player?
I'm going to go with my instincts and just say it's Waro 2K.
That's fair. That's fair, and I think most people would go there.
And there's a very good case to make, I think, for especially Demka.
Yeah.
I think he plays so many crucial spots and he plays them really well. But for me, I'm gonna small brain it. I'm gonna stick with the highlight man. I'm gonna go Waro 2K.
Yeah.
Herder, Orb, go boom.
Sometimes it's like the most midwit thing to do is to pick somebody that's just a hipster pick, but just to make a bad pick, but just to be hipster, But Waro is most impactful, has crazy clutch potential too, finds ways in game. It seems like he's unleashing himself more and more. Demka, to me, sometimes like roll for roll, he could actually be better than Waro, where it's just that he over delivers in positions so frequently. But
there's no right to it.
Yeah, but Waro, like in terms of overall the outlook of a game and how much he has impacted it positively for Monty, I think that it's generally speaking Waro is the guy for them.
Yeah, I don't think it's not a midwick hipster pick to take Demka right now. Though. I think this is a general. This is a general points statement. Are incredibly valid, and he does deserve tons of credit. But it's hard to pick against the highlight machine of the team, the guy who gets the big plays. Mm-hmm. It's Waro 2K generally. So, credit to them since losing Boros that they've managed to just replace that impact. The entry fragging has been done by committee since he left to a slightly greater extent because obviously he monopolized that sort of play. But no, credit to them. Astute signing in Bro. And a great level found by Waro 2K to keep them afloat.
Yeah, okay. Overall, I think that's going to sum it up for us here. So, actually, King T, want to give you the chance to plug whatever it is that you want to plug for people to catch you on other forms of media.
All right, well, it's let's see if I know my own URLs. It's at KingTCSGO, which is now obviously outdated on Twitter. And from there, you can find the YouTube links. I've no idea what finds me anymore because I always try to find myself. I struggle. Sometimes a random rapper no one heard of comes up. Sometimes a rapper people have heard of comes up. There's two King Ts that aren't me who make rap music, so that's cool. But yeah, Twitter's the one to find me on at KingTCSGO. And yeah, the series, the one that I think is the one I take pride on is Prospects. You can find the full series going back almost 3 years, maybe more now, going all the way back to the days of Neofrag and Torshi,
Yep.
way back when. Like there's some old school gems, a Spinks video as well that felt criminally well timed because I picked him as Ents were just about to explode on with him, and that was cheeky, I think. But yeah, whole playlist is out there. I'm personally quite proud of most of that work. So yeah, that's what to check out, and that's where to find me.
Cool. I'll, of course, leave those in links below in the description, so be sure to check out King T. Thank you again so much for being a guest, and that's going to be
My
another
pleasure.
episode of the Mauisnake Show. So thanks, everybody.